and then I'll do the intro and then we just talk. Greetings, Mark Garang here, publisher of The Sun, and my guest today, as you might recognize, is Jeb Bradley. Jeb, how you doing?
I'm great, Mark.
Good.
How are you?
Good
Thanks.
to see you. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, always.
You're retired Senate President, Majority Leader, all that. Now you've been retired for like a full year now, right?
Yeah, it's a year. It's a year.
Now, I was talking to someone who, because we're retirement age and people are retiring. So I was talking to one former executive director of something, and she says, nobody calls me anymore. So how much are you still
No,
in the loop?
I don't get as many calls as I used to, but surprisingly, I still get calls. I mean, and it's oftentimes to advise other senators. I get calls all the time from, my former colleagues, but I still get calls from, people that live in the area that I represented, and how do I solve this problem? How do I solve that problem? So I still have relationships in Concord, and there was friends of mine, for instance, that their daughter has medical conditions, and so I, got involved and talked to the people that needed to be talked to, and hopefully the situation's
So do the
resolved.
senators call you for advice?
Mm-hmm.
They should.
Yeah.
The person I was referencing said, I have all this institutional knowledge, and nobody calls me. And so obviously, it seems like there should be like a
Yeah,
president pro
there are a
tem.
couple of senators that call me all the time, and one in particular, I probably hear from her 2 or 3 times a day on different things.
Really?
And
But that's good.
yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good, and I continue to read the news and listen to the news and watch TV, and
Do you miss it? Do you miss it?
Yeah, I do and I don't. I was ready to call it a day and hang it up.
Yeah.
And but after doing what I've done for 32 years, there's a part of you that misses it and a part of you that is glad that people are still calling me up.
And there's a part of you that can hike more.
Yeah, well, I haven't hiked enough because I'm getting older and my knees are bulky, and it's beautiful day to day. It's full winter conditions on Mount Washington right now. So
Are you still doing the winter hikes? like that?
yeah, I did a little bit this winter, and hopefully we'll do a little bit more this winter. I like winter hiking the most. It's just beautiful, and
It's easier
it's easier as long as it's not too cold, and
on your feet. It's smoother, no
it's
roots and rocks.
smoother as long as you're not breaking trail.
Right.
If there's 2 feet of new snow,
Right.
that gets a little, especially at my age, a little old. I've done it, but
Yeah, and I just saw today actually that Mount Washington may set a record for snow in November.
could be. It is, like I
Beautiful.
said, it looks full winter conditions up there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go through a whole bunch of stuff.
Okay.
All right, here we go. So this is really local. The Libby Museum in Wolfboro.
Yep.
And our viewers don't really know it, but we did a story. We don't usually cover Wolfboro, but we did this story. And the Libby Museum has fallen into disrepair, and there's this whole controversy. You get the Friends over here, you get the selectmen. People are accusing the selectmen for not doing anything about it for decades. Is there an answer to this thing?
So, my perception, and one of my mom's best friends was head of Friends of the Libby for a long time. She's passed away, and I think with her leadership, the ties to the community maybe took a backseat a bit. The building has problems. There's no question about that. It'll be expensive to fix, and the voters actually, I think it was a fairly close margin, turned down a bond issue
Right.
last year. And that has happened in Wolfboro quite a bit, and property taxes have gone up in Wolfboro. There've been a lot of, new building projects, recent, Governor Wentworth expansion, new fire station, town hall. And for the projects that have passed to pass, like for instance the town hall, it took a really aggressive public-private partnership. So whether it was the town hall or the hockey rink, Pop Whalen hockey rink, people that supported it went out and raised a lot of money. So I'm not exactly sure how much Friends of the Libby were able to raise and put aside for that project. But I think people had just said taxes are getting too high. They didn't see much relief, and the Libby was.
I mean, not to get too far in the weeds with it, but it seemed the accusations basically is that the selectmen have just sort of dragged their heels with this thing because they get state money. They get money from it. It's a beautiful location, right? It looks on the lake.
Oh yeah, it's gorgeous.
And so that's got to. Who owns that property? Is it the Libby Trust?
I think it's the Libby Trust, but I'm not sure, Mark.
But they get money from slips, rentals, and stuff. I mean, and money comes in. So
Do they get money from slips? I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
Yeah. I mean, did you personally? You think it's worth it? I mean, it's got all taxidermy
as I
stuff.
recall, I voted for, just as an individual to actually do the renovations because I've been through the exhibit several times. I mean, if you like
Old school stuff, right?
Yeah, natural history of, the Wolfboro and the lakes. It's really pretty interesting. And like I remember a dugout canoe that had come from the time of, the Native Americans and just how they used to, get around the big lake. And so I thought it's a great museum, but I also understand that it's got to be practical. The building has problems. It's expensive to maintain. So I understand both sides.
Okay. I know they have a hand of a mummy in there. And one of the prized possession is a carrier pigeon, which, and I didn't research it, but it always struck me as how can a carrier pigeon, I know they're extinct, but there were like billions of those things, so they only had but anyway. All right, so the other Southern Carroll County story is the Glenn Cardelli resigning and moving. So
I talked to Glenn after I learned that, he had resigned because it was, and I didn't, not being in office anymore, I wasn't aware of, some of the things that had gone on. But I think, what he told me is he was moving to be closer to, his family. I think his wife probably wanted to do it. And he had been a state rep for a long time. I believe he's in his 80s. So
Really?
I think that all of those things contributed. He was pretty pretty outspoken on the things that he cared about a lot. He certainly led the effort on the education savings accounts or vouchers. He led efforts on trying to get pornography out of school, which some people called book bans. And he never backed down from a fight. And he may have just felt enough already.
yeah, I mean the street says that it was spousal pressure, is to move back to where he is in Texas with
And I
his family.
think his daughter lives in, I believe it's Austin, and he has grandkids. So I get that.
Yeah, no, it's it's for he's been so active. It's like boom, there he goes. All right, a little more seriously, really, and I think it's been talked about many times that one of your signature efforts in the legislature was this Medicare expansion, and here we go. So it's under threat again, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's like 60,000 people who in New Hampshire are on the Medicare expansion. What I didn't know is like 25% of all the children in New Hampshire are on Medicaid expansion. That's a lot. And so the big beautiful bill. So you got two things. One is the big beautiful bill. So one of the trigger that we have, right? If the federal funding goes below 90%, Medicaid expansion's out. Is that correct?
Yes, in New Hampshire.
In New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So, and the big beautiful bill, I think, is going to require these work.
Well, and work requirements was something I always supported. When we opened up Medicaid expansion to able-bodied adults that are childless, I thought, if you can work or go to school or take care of a family member, we made it actually pretty easy to comply with a work requirement. And I think there should be a work requirement because the benefit is it's expensive, it's costly, and it's worth a lot to the recipients. Now, necessary, it keeps people out of hospitals, it keeps them healthier. So I was really happy to quarterback, through my time in the legislature doing it. But I always thought that for able-bodied adults that didn't have children.
Is that in our law?
Yeah, it is in our law.
And what percent?
So
how many
the
people?
reason what happened was We passed that in 2018 with work requirements. It was a bipartisan compromise. In 2019, they came, the Democrats came back and wanted some more changes, which we made. But then there were lawsuits in Tennessee and I think another state had gone further ahead. And the Medicaid law did not require or allow for work requirements. Now, the tax bill that passed this year, the one big beautiful bill, allows them specifically. So we backed away from the work requirements because the feds pulled the plug on it. And we also found they would have been expensive for the Department of Health and Human Services to monitor. So all of that led to us curtailing or basically stopping our program in 2019. And so we ended it. Now it's back, and the legislature agreed to have work requirements. And I think, I don't have a problem with it as long as it's administered well and, it's easy to comply. It shouldn't just be that you have to have a job. It could be going to school. It could be taking care of a sick relative. I mean, there were any number of things that would allow somebody to comply with the work requirement.
Right, but how many, did you doing all this through all those years, like what percentage are people who are basically taking advantage of it that aren't working?
So that's a good question. And I don't know that we ever had an answer to that, the number of people that it would have applied to.
Because most of these, most people, the classic single mom with 2 kids and trying to
and that wouldn't, if you have a child under 18, according to our law, you wouldn't have had to have
but New Hampshire specifically, as you just said, is that specifically has that 90% trigger law.
Yes.
The other states don't that have Medicaid expansion.
There are a couple of other states that do. So I think it would be very difficult for and the big beautiful bill didn't change the 90%.
Oh, it didn't?
No. What it did try to do is better target people that, for lack of a better word, are abusing the system and shouldn't have qualified for it. And so I think whether it's Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, any of these entitlement programs, they're there for people that have either earned them, Social Security, Medicare, or need them, Medicaid. But they're not there to be abused. And so I think that's where the reforms came in. To the best of my knowledge, while there has been some pressure from, Republicans in Congress to reduce the 90% as part of a budget saving, it didn't happen in the big beautiful bill. So New Hampshire is okay. But had we, going back to when we first did Medicaid expansion in 2014, it never would have passed without, ensuring that we were not on the hook for any different ratio than 90-10. And because New Hampshire, we have we have the lowest poverty rate in the nation. So what that means is we're at the lowest reimbursement rate for Medicaid recipients at 50-50. So the state pays 50%, the feds pay 50%. If you have a higher percentage of people that are on Medicaid, you get a higher reimbursement. That's just the way it works. So knowing that it was, how expensive it was going to be in the $500 million range, if we we already figured we had to do 50 million at 10%. If we had to potentially do 100 million or 200 million or whatever, it would have become unaffordable. And I know for a fact it wouldn't have passed 10 years ago.
So do you think, whatever the Medicaid changes are going to happen with the big beautiful bill, it's not for next year, I guess. It's 2 years when it passed. So do you think there's any danger that New Hampshire's going to lose the Medicaid?
At this point, I don't. I don't see it happening. I think that there are enough Republicans in Congress whose states, like New Hampshire, are 40 states have, it's either 39 or 40 states, I think, Mark, have bought into Medicaid expansion. I think overall it's been good, and I think that people in Congress understand that. And maybe I'm guilty of wishful thinking, but I don't think it changes. Now, I do think bringing up, Obamacare, and that's what the government shutdown was all about. And the fact that the subsidies that were in question, most of which, at least the ones that were in question, were for people that were above 400% of poverty. And that was sort of the cutoff point when Obamacare was first passed. That without those subsidies, the program doesn't work. And so the biggest problem that I always felt with Obamacare was that it really didn't cut the cost of health care. And so I think it's really important for Republicans, and I think it's just as important for Democrats, to try to figure out, hopefully in a collaborative, bipartisan way, which, I don't know that happens anymore in Washington, but it's going to need to happen with Obamacare, that we push reforms that will make healthcare, the delivery of healthcare, more affordable. So whether that's bigger buying pools for businesses to be able to participate in a buying pool, whether it's individuals with health savings account and being able to take tax advantage, whether it's greater transparency of billing, and anybody that's been through, a major medical incident, they're suddenly getting all these surprise bills that they have no idea where they're coming from. And they had no idea to begin with that they were going to be subject to them, so they didn't shop around. So more price transparency. Trump's idea, which it's really not his idea, but he's been espousing it, of instead of all the money going to insurance companies, that more of it goes somehow, and I don't know how those details would work, to individuals. These are all things that really need to be discussed. So there were parts of Obamacare that I think have worked pretty well, Medicaid expansion being one of them, and the insurance reforms being one of them. So the insurance reforms that were part of Obamacare were largely a number of states, New Hampshire included, already had adopted. For instance, you couldn't be denied insurance. If you wanted to buy insurance, you could buy insurance.
Right, which was
guaranteed access. That was a law in New Hampshire prior to Obamacare. Absolutely necessary. Did it drive up the cost of insurance? Yes, it did, but it also spread out the risk. So, and that wasn't the only insurance reform in Obamacare. There was something called community rating, where you can't differentiate based on health risk of an individual. Okay, so the only thing that was allowed, and pre-existing conditions covered. So, if somebody was the smoker, yeah, they paid higher rates, but that was the only thing. So, and the age differential. So those insurance reforms nationwide, I think, made sense, but the health exchanges haven't worked as well as people had hoped they would work, and the price of health care has continued to climb and climb and climb, and that's what needs to be attacked.
Right, but to me, there are two separate things. One is the increase in health costs, period. And that's a whole other thing. You could argue that Ozempic by itself is going to be a major factor in lowering health costs, just because people are going to be losing weight and just have fewer chronic illnesses and stuff. But the delivery system of Obamacare, we have a mixed program here, but 4 or 5 people here on Obamacare that we help pay for. We just got the rates. People are going from $50 to $250. Those people are not going to vote for Republicans, for that.
And that's what I mean. Republicans can't ignore this problem. Right. It's got to be solved. The rising cost of health care is a problem that has to be dealt with.
Right. But those are societal. Those are bigger issues.
But you can't always just throw money at it from the government's point of view. I think there are some things that should, as I just went through, should be done to actually lower the cost of health care. Make it a little bit, somewhat more market-driven as opposed to insurance-driven.
And I have to admit, I'm not clear on this in my own mind, but, between veterans get health insurance, Medicaid, us guys and Medicare, there's only a small pool of people left who pay
It's about
private
50% of
I
the
know.
public
And
that
why
is
not just
not.
have universal health care?
Well-
Medicare works, and just have the government, because they don't reimburse as much. You get the insurance companies out of it. I mean, you know.
You could, and a lot of people are making that argument.
And
And
Bernie
I'm
is
on
on-
Medicare.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Works great, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I pay. I think you pay 25% in your premiums. It comes out of the Social
Yeah.
Security.
And the more you make, the more you pay.
The
more you
problem
made.
with the government totally running a healthcare system is, we're at what, $36 trillion in deficit, and Medicare is a huge part of that. And as those costs go up, as people demand the services, rightfully so, without the reforms that lowers the cost of healthcare, you're going to have government rationing, and that's what happens in a lot of other places. So it is something that on some level makes some sense, on other levels not
But,
so sure.
we have to, one final distinction on this is that when you say run the healthcare system, it's not. I mean, the government, Medicare doesn't run the healthcare system, it just pays for it.
It pays for it.
So there's still, so it's like the military, right? I mean, we're okay with our military, and the government doesn't run the military, but it does get
No, you make a
contracts.
good point, but when the costs get beyond what we can afford, that's when you're going to get rationing, and that's what's happened. That's why Canadians or people in England wait forever to get a lot of treatments.
And they have a
people
two-tier
come here.
system.
Yeah.
They have
So yeah,
it's a tough one. All right.
It is a very
Okay,
tough
so would you, I guess the question is, if you're in Congress and it's going to come up in December, it was the whole government shutdown thing, would you vote for the continuation of these, the tax credits?
So what I think should have been done is that there should be at least a continuation of the subsidies for up to 400% of poverty for some period of time. And that should be done in combination with a bipartisan effort to, whether it's buying pools for businesses, health savings accounts becoming more popular, greater transparency, all the things that would drive down the cost of health care. I think you needed that safety valve for a period of time to make the reforms so that the system that we've had, Obamacare for the last, since 2014, becomes more affordable. I think that that's a rational compromise. Yeah. And who knows? Maybe they get there, maybe they don't. I do think that there are enough Republicans in Congress that realize you can't just go cold turkey the way, in President Trump's first term, had it not been for Senator McCain, Obamacare would have been repealed. So that shouldn't be on the table either. We've got to reform it, but you can't have people going, as you just said, from $50 a month to $250 a month and expect that you're going to have a system that works. It won't. People will drop their insurance.
Yeah. All righty. So the other big state story, and I know you were an advocate of it, is the vouchers, the education vouchers. And when we first talked about this years ago, it was only, and you made this point, I mean, I think we all agree in school choice, and it was then to help people who couldn't afford it. Now anybody can be a part of it, and the cost has gone from under $1 million, and I guess they're expecting
it's about
50.
40 or 50 now.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's only 17% of the people who are now taking advantage of it are in the low income bracket. So I was always against it because I don't want my tax dollars going to a private school or religious school.
So I didn't have a problem with tax dollars going for, people of modest means to a, private school or religious school. We probably don't see that in the same way. But I felt that the legislature should not have opened it up to anybody at any income level. And obviously that was the decision that was made after I left. It is capped at 10,000, although that cap will be exceeded, and then it, I think, goes up to 12,500, and that probably will be the case. That so it is costly. I do think for families that need that choice, they should have it. But I think if you can, afford to send your son or daughter to Exeter,
Phyllis Exeter, $55,000.
Yeah, I don't think the $5,000 should be going to those folks either. But obviously I wasn't there, so
Would you have fought against that?
I probably would have. And, to her credit, I think Governor Ayotte didn't want that either, but it was part of the budget, and the budget was already difficult enough, so she accepted it.
I mean, so what are the challenges that are facing the legislature this term?
Well, I think the budget's going to be the biggest one. Revenue is off. I just looked at it a couple of days ago. I think through October, we're $27 million under expectations. So
27 million for the what? I mean,
for this fiscal year that started on July 1st.
That's not
so
very
that's
much.
Over what? July, August, September. Over 4 months, it's actually pretty worrisome.
Okay.
So, we'll see what happens in, November and December. But then you've got 6 months or a quarter of the budget period. If we're, $30 or $40 million off by the end of December, I think, cuts are going to have to be made. And that becomes a problem because they already made some difficult decisions in this budget based on declining revenue. And if that becomes...
I mean, bureaucracies are bureaucracies, and I think everybody realizes that. It's particularly a governmental bureaucracy. It's probably can be trimmed. Any organization can be. I mean, Amazon, they just cut 40,000 people. I mean, things happen. Mm-hmm. But do you think our state government, regardless of this budget, I mean, is it run pretty efficiently?
I think it is run pretty efficiently and effectively, and I think that the program cuts would tend to, hurt people that depend on, benefits from Health and Human Services. That, whether it is parents with a disabled child, which we funded, and have ended the wait list because we've had enough money to make sure that we do that. Whether it's, the kind of money that we've put into mental health services, which we've done a lot. Those are, things that any governor would have to look at to potentially make cuts, or the university system, or, the water grants that, we've given. I think Governor Ayotte has been cautious and not overreacted to the first 4 months of declining revenues, but November and December are going to tell the story. And you've got an education funding issue that people are going to want to see.
That's coming back, right?
Yeah. And, the interesting thing, Mark, is the Department of Education just released, their figures for this year. And there are about 2,000 less students statewide. And so that does mean declining costs for the state, but at the same time, the average, state expenditure per pupil is over $7,000, which is very close to what the judge ordered. But the way that we've done it over the last 10 or 12 years is that communities that have the most need, like Berlin's getting over $14,000, Wolfboro's getting the base amount of adequacy. And so we've structured the formula to help the towns that really need it the most, that don't have, as good a property tax base. So the formula that was passed in the budget when I was Senate President, and I had a little bit to do with that budget, quite a bit actually, and it was Sununu's formula that we actually modified somewhat to make sure that we were helping communities most in need. And it was called extraordinary grants. We're raising the amount of education funding by 3 or 4% a year over the next 10 years. So I understand that people always want more. That's going to be a big issue for this legislature too. Yeah. Even though the court is not, there's no enforcement mechanism.
Right.
So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So why are the revenues down? State revenues. Where is it from?
So during the pandemic, with a lot of money floating around, business taxes were, very strong. Business taxes have not been as strong, and I think people aren't spending quite as much money because everything costs more. So that means, rooms and meals hasn't done maybe as well as expected, or some of the other.
What about the interest and dividends tax? I mean, that was $160 million a year, I think, right? I mean, and that's only paid by, I forget now, but it was like 1,500 people paid in the state.
Yeah,
paid
it was.
half of it?
It actually was 60 or 70,000 people paid
it, but
but it was a handful of people that paid the lion's share of it.
you were one of
agree.
them, I'm sure.
I paid the interest and dividends tax. So, look, I always took the conflict of interest rule, except when it was part of the budget, and never voted on it as a standalone.
Yeah.
I voted, for the budget with that provision in it. It is an income tax. It does make us more competitive, but at the same time, there was a loss of revenue too.
Yeah, no, I mean, nobody wants to be taxed, but, I know in Maine they want to just get the rich people here, right? And so that's an incentive for that. And I suppose there's still incentive, but I don't know if anybody didn't or did move to New Hampshire. I know for regular state.
Well, I know that people from Massachusetts have moved to New Hampshire when they instituted the millionaire's tax. So, and it wasn't just New Hampshire, but,
Yeah.
people went to Florida, Texas, so.
I don't know, that's a big chunk of change. What about the Sununu Center? Is there anything going with that? I mean,
I think
difference?
that is very problematic, to say the least. I think that, Karen Umberger was a leader in this and initially passed the first bill. I sponsored the second bill that was negotiated by the Attorney General, John Formella, that increased the amount that a victim could get from 1.5 million to 2.5 million. It was a settlement with the plaintiff attorneys. Now everything's been changed. The AG gets to veto settlement agreements.
because they took it away from the judge, right?
They took it away from Justice Broderick,
Right.
who resigned.
You think that was the right thing to do?
I don't, so we'll leave it at that.
All right. Didn't seem like it.
No, I thought that, and who knows how it's going to, from the state's perspective, work out. There's going to be a lot more litigation, and if, I heard somewhere that the Meehan case, the one that was decided for $39 million, as I recall, and then the attorneys screwed up when they did the paperwork, so the instructions to the jury were wrong, and the law, which only allows $475,000 in settlement, applied. So Mr. Meehan was, left hanging out to dry. That's going to the Supreme Court, and how they rule on that is going to be interesting. But there are going to be a lot of cases that I think go through the court system, and who knows what the ultimate
But is that
outcome
is that how they're all going to be adjudicated, as like one by one through the court system?
Well, if the plaintiff attorneys don't use the settlement mechanism, which they are saying they don't trust, and they're now steering all their clients away from it, and there are some 1,000 clients, that's how it will play out.
I mean, that's 1,000 clients times X millions, right? Potentially.
During the settlement process, the average settlement was about $500,000.
Adds up.
These, kids that were held in state custody were victimized. Nobody's arguing that.
Right.
And, at least in the time that I was in the Senate, working with Karen Umberger and others, and to his credit, Governor Sununu really led on this. We felt that we had to do what was right by the victims, but also protect the long-term fiscal, wherewithal of the state. And so the settlement mechanism was seen to be the way to do it. So if the attorneys of the victims don't use the settlement mechanism and they go to court, it is an unknown.
And these all, I mean, people in North Country here, I don't think, I don't, so I'm assuming most people don't really understand what happened with the Sununu Center. I mean, just in general, what period was that, and how did it get so?
So it was in the 80s and 90s generally. Kids were abused. It was physical abuse, it was sexual abuse, it was mental abuse, and there were some very bad actors.
How did that even happen?
Poor oversight.
I mean, state oversight, though.
Yeah, oh yeah. And that's why the state's on the
Right.
hook. And that's why people like me felt that we had to, make up for the fact that these kids were victimized.
I mean, it just seems for 20 years, like when does this, one thing if it's a private rehab center someplace, and things that go on.
No, this was a long-term problem. And, you listen to what the victims have said about what happened to them, it's really very bad.
What department was that?
So it was run through DCYF, I think.
Okay, well,
I'm trying to remember.
It's just hard to believe
Part of
that
health
people
and-
didn't come forward during 20
I
years.
was shocked too, actually,
Yeah.
that, in this day and age that people hadn't.
Because
come
it's not
forward.
like the 40s and 30s we're talking
No,
about. This is just 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Anything else going on the state level? I just saw that talking about reducing the requirements for meat packers. There's only 4 meat packers in the state, and one of them's in Conway.
Oh, really?
So if you have, your farmer, blah, 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 it's really difficult to get your meat animals processed because there's such a jam up in the fall. So they're trying to reduce the requirements for that, which I think is a good idea.
Yeah, it probably is.
It's like jam, right? I mean,
as
people
long
can't,
as long as the appropriate health and safety standards are adhered to.
it's like apple cider. You have to have it pasteurized now. You just can't sell it out of the. Anyway. All right. So regular politics, the bigger politics. What do you. Oh, by the way, what's the difference between being a president and the majority leader?
So the president of the Senate.
And you were both. I know you were both.
Yeah,
right?
I was majority leader for a number of years, and my last 2 years was Senate president. So the Senate president presides and has a lot of influence over who's on what committees, and who serves on committees of conference and things like that. Any good Senate president is going to, because the Senate is so small, work with the Democrats or the Republicans, depending on who's the Senate president, to try to procedurally handle the business of the Senate in a responsible way. A Senate president that gets too far ahead of him or herself and just arbitrarily making decisions will have problems.
Well,
But
you've always had. I mean, I think your reputation is you work with people and
I tried.
you listen.
Yeah, I tried.
And so, who was the majority leader when you were president?
Sharon Carson, who's now the Senate president.
Yeah. So, if you're the majority leader, is that more like the real operations, the puppet master behind the
So
scenes?
the majority leader tends to be the person that leads all the floor debates and is generally the person that speaks for the majority in any debate. And, when I was majority leader, Senator Morse was pretty good at allowing me to have broad say on, not say, but try to provide the direction of where the Republican caucus should go. So even though there was a lot early on of, say, opposition to Medicaid expansion and joining in, we decided that that was where we were going to go. And not every Republican agreed with that, but we did it anyway. And so that was always how I saw the role of the majority leader, trying to coalesce a majority around, whatever the issue was.
Yep. Now you ran. You were first a state senator, right? And then you became a congressman.
No, I was first in the House.
State House.
State House. Yeah, the legislature. Then ran for Congress, and then
You went from the State House to Congress.
State House to Congress, and then after a 2-year absence, went back into the state Senate.
State
yeah,
Senate,
there was
right.
a vacancy, and I ran in a special election in 2009.
Yeah. How come you never wanted to be governor?
Well, I flirted with the idea a couple of times, but I think at the end of the day, I felt that my ability to work within a legislative process was a stronger suit than being governor.
I mean, are there strings pulled, to say, wait a minute, it's not your turn, Jeb, it's Kelly's turn and all that. I mean, who calls
On the
those
Republican side, there's always primaries, and I've been through some
shots? Yeah.
rather grueling primaries. So as I was in the state Senate as majority leader and feeling like, okay, we've done some good things here. I mean, remember the bill that we got that the Department of Labor had to give 30 days notice or something
yeah.
like that. So it was things like
Yeah.
that
Oh
made me
my
think
gosh.
that
Labor Department thing. That's,
yeah,
it's one of my.
that I'm pretty happy doing what I'm doing. Why try to do something else?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that played a big part of it too.
Yeah, and not that viewers not going to know, not going to go in that story, but the Labor Department used to basically extort money from people like the Sun, where they'd come in and they'd find these minor violations, and we were fined like, I can't remember exactly, 15 grand. We went down to there was the hearing there, and they said, okay, we'll reduce it to $800. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
And then you championed the bill, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and we got it passed
Yeah.
when we were in the majority.
Yeah.
So, doing things like that made me feel, okay, I'm in the right spot.
Right. So the Labor Department, the end of that story is the Labor Department now has to give fair, like any insurance company. If an insurance company walks through this building and say your plug is not right, they give you a warning. They don't give you a $20,000 fine.
Right.
So now that's mechanisms there. So the minor violations are just issued warnings and not these monster fines. Anyway, so the congressional candidates are coming through now. Like why do people run for Congress? I mean, it seems like and I'm going to put you in the career politician category,
Yeah,
and you are.
can.
And you are.
Yeah, I am.
But you're,
I don't deny
but
it.
you're very successful at it. Rather, and this is not a Republican Democrat, but you're a learned student of government. You've worked it. Chris Pappas is the same thing as a congressman. He started executive council and congressman. Now he's going. But then you get these. Okay, that's fine. That's one model of a person. But then other people, all of a sudden, they just decide to be a congressman. And I just wonder, like this guy who came in for an interview in the Republican side, Chris Pappas is running for Senate, so the whole our congressional seat is wide open. Totally competent, totally this. Anthony
DiLorenzo.
What is it?
DiLorenzo.
DiLorenzo, thank you. And, totally competent, going to do anything, but I'm thinking, like, why is he running for Congress? Is it just because he's done everything in the business world and it's his time? And the same thing with Chris Bright, who has now dropped out. An amazing military career, and all of a sudden he decides to run for Congress.
I think that people see problems in our country and they think that they can be part of trying to solve them. I think there's also a certain, sense of accomplishment ego-wise if you run for Congress and you're successful. And I think that drives people to do it. I mean, that certainly what I felt about it when I ran, and I know that when I was in the House after I was in the legislature for 12 years, and I just felt like I wanted to do something different, but I liked, being in public service, so I thought I had something to offer. And
you're in Congress and the federal Congress in a tough time.
I was in a tough time, and it just
it's right in the middle of the Iraq War. I mean,
Iraq
that
War.
was a tough one.
I mean, I remember, Mark, you you grilled me, and rightfully so. And the press should do that, and you did your job, and people had enough,
Right.
and so I paid the price for it, and that was okay.
That was one of the blue waves.
It didn't, you just have to, I always tell people, and this really applies to life, not just public service, but don't get too high when things are going good, because things will go bad before you know it. And when things aren't going good, don't get too low, because they can improve too. So I accepted it and move on.
Yeah, no, you've been obviously very successful in your post-congressional life. Why? It's funny because Anthony was in and Chris Bright was in a while ago, and we've had a couple of the Democrats, Stephanie Shaheen, and when you look at them individually, again, not about Democrat and Republicans, they're all very accomplished. They're all very competent. They've done a lot and seem reasonable. So how is it then once they get down to Washington? I'm not saying them. Why is it so polarized?
That is a really good question, and I don't think there's any easy answers. But I'll try to give you, my perspective on it. I think when you get to Washington, there's a lot of herd mentality. you need the party infrastructure, especially in a swing district like CD1, to be behind you, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. And so there's a lot of pressure that gets put on members of Congress, junior members of Congress in particular, to toe the line. And people generally tend to do that because the leadership in Congress exert a huge amount of influence over your ability, to succeed, to get on the right committees, to be able to fundraise. And so there's that. Then, secondly, I think because there's, an us versus them, and we're fighting over the gavel every 2 years, that there's no time for collaboration, because each Congress wants to go right at trying to derail the other one. And then you have the 24-hour news cycle, and so many talking heads on TV that are as polarized as the rest of us, and maybe more so. So it is a recipe for, the kind of divisiveness that we have. And then, you get, starting really with President Bush and Iraq, it's just been very divisive ever since then, and it's only getting worse.
I mean, the redistricting, and I know Sununu vetoed one of the more radical redistricting plans for New Hampshire, but our districts are pretty good. I mean, the 2 congressional districts, right? I mean, CD1,
so
as you
that
say.
Was, I was the majority leader when we did the last district, and as you recall, there was a district that started over in Keene, came through the North Country, down to Brookfield, as I recalled, including Conway, and all of this area would have gone into the 2nd CD. And then around Route 93, the more Republican area, and he vetoed that.
Right.
That was
and a good thing.
One
good
of the
way.
only votes that I made against the majority in the Senate. I voted against it because I just felt that it was too much of a change, and that I just couldn't agree with it. So
I mean, is there a fun? I mean, to me, the redistricting, and
well, now it's getting, both sides are
with Texas and California.
using Texas, California, New York is Missouri. I mean, it's the Supreme Court's going to have to decide, I guess, on all of these districts, because, with the U.S. Congress, the House being so evenly matched, 5 or 6 seats swing the balance of power.
Yeah, no, it just seems as though, and I realize it's a political mechanism to redistrict every 10 years, right? Is that 5 years? 10
Based
years?
on the census.
Based on the
It's
census.
always based on the census.
But it just seems like it should be so we create these districts like CD1. It's always a close district, right? And New Hampshire actually is the whole thing. We've been a blue state for a while now. I'm not a blue state, but a purple state, I guess.
Yeah, no, and CD1 is really a swing district, even though, it has been, with Carol Shea Porter and then Chris Pappas, Democratic controlled for 8 or 10 years. It's one of the ones that's always pretty competitive.
How do you account for the I mean, we say that, but our whole federal delegations are Democrat, and
you know what? I can't explain that. I think that people, they like the way that Republicans have governed New Hampshire: no income tax, no sales tax, generally frugal, generally things work pretty well in New Hampshire compared to other states. And so I think that's why Republicans have done well in the State House for the last 10 or 12 years. But, starting with Jean Shaheen, who, beat John Sununu in 2008, she's, I think, always done I haven't agreed with her votes, let me put it that way.
Yeah.
But she has tried to work for New Hampshire. And, Hassan won a close election. And
she beat Kelly. Hassan would beat Kelly.
Hassan beat Kelly by 1,000
1,000
votes.
All those UNH kids.
And, it just once you are elected and become an incumbent in these federal races, it gets harder to beat you. Now, I'm sort of the example that disproves that rule because I got beaten as an incumbent.
Right.
But generally speaking, it's pretty hard to beat an incumbent, especially in a U.S. Senate race.
Yeah. Well, it's any predictions for this?
So I think I like Chris Pappas. I think he's pretty well known. I think the progressives on the Democratic side are, going to mount an effort to bring him further to the left. And again, I haven't supported the way he votes, so I think that whether it's Scott Brown or John, E. Sununu, and I like them both, and I'm friends with them both, and I haven't endorsed anybody. I do think that Sununu is probably the stronger candidate, kind of riding on his younger brother Chris's coattails, but I think that's a horse race, and you're going to see, if Sununu is the Republican nominee, it's going to be a 50 million plus
Are you going to
race
endorse?
in New Hampshire.
Are you going to endorse one of them?
I'll wait and see how I feel.
Right, because I remember that. I think he went on some hike with Scott Brown.
I did. I like Scott. He's a good
he's
guy.
a character.
Yeah,
I mean,
he
he's
is.
like he's a guitar playing rock and roll.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Yeah.
I like him. Whether he can, the polling shows that Sununu is the stronger candidate. I think that is the case.
Yeah, and John was in. I think it said.
And I
this-
like John too. He was in Congress when I was in Congress, so we worked together to keep the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard alive.
And it's really two different. And this gets back to the, the Epstein thing, where they're going to release the files and all that. And I guess everybody agrees now they should be released. But the political pundits are saying, well, this is a crack in the MAGA shield here, because Marjorie Taylor Greene and a couple other Republicans came out against Trump. And that gets back to Scott Brown, because he was ambassador, New Zealand or someplace?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Australian, yeah. And so he's going to be, I'm sure, it'll be interesting what the primary is, because he's a Trumpster. And
he is.
John Sununu is not.
And John Sununu is not. But, I think one of the reasons why Dan Innes got into the race and he's dropped out was because Scott burned some bridges with Trump, too. So criticizing him over January 6th. So we'll see what happens there. Trump has shown to be a little bit more practical in endorsements in this cycle. I think he's going to want to wait and see who, has a better campaign, and that's fundraising, polling, all of the kind of things that build a successful campaign. And my good friend Chuck Morse thought he was going to get Trump's endorsement in 22, and he didn't.
And he was running for
U.S. Senate.
Right.
And then Trump, when Chuck was running for governor, said, I should have endorsed him. And then he didn't endorse him for governor. It is very likely, or it could be the case, certainly, that Trump just stays out of it and lets the primary happen. So we'll see.
Well, I know, John E. Sununu, and he came through before he announced a couple of months ago, and it's like, good to see him. I hadn't seen him in years, actually, because when he was a rep, he was a very good congressman, constituent service, like you, just everywhere. And it's like, boy, it's like a throwback. It's like back to the Reagan era or something, you don't fit into the, just a moderate, solid conservative. And he said 2 more years, meaning that you didn't want to talk about Trump, and I was just yakking with him outside, but it's like, okay, he gets in, there's 2 more years of Trump, and he's gone. And then, there's going to be a certain, you got to think the Republicans are going to kind of, without Trump, he's such a force of nature, it's hard to see anybody being another Trump.
I don't think you'll see that in our lifetime.
You won't say whether that's good or bad. All right, Jeb, I think we're done.
Always a pleasure, Mike.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, take care.
Take care.